So transform your world, be a leader for the common good. Main argument for me is this afternoon is to say that to be a transformational leader, we first need to undergo our own personal transformation in the spirit of Romans 12:2, to be transformed by the renewing of our minds so that we may discern what is the will of God. Will Rogers, one of my favorite quotes, hope this isn't too crass, says there are three kinds of men: the ones that learn by reading, the few who learn by observation, and the rest of them have to pee on the electric fence for themselves. Well, learning about leadership is a never-ending process, and so I feel like I've done a lot of, and continue to do a lot of peeing on the fence in this regard. Perhaps the most important thing I've learned in the last 10 years, the number one job of a leader is to define reality. Max Dupree wrote a book in 1989 called Leadership as an Art. Really small book, really provocative. Max was the president and CEO of Herman Miller for many years. So this is what Max said, and you know, I didn't get it when I was 30 years old. I didn't understand what he meant by this. Max is saying if we want to develop transformational leaders, we need to help them develop an ability to define reality. So since then, I've really come to understand it, and I've added to it. The number one job of a leader is to define reality and help others develop the same capacity. And in our role as an educational institution, I want us to consider how we might work at this with our students to help them learn to define reality, to see more clearly what is going on around them as they provide leadership. So I'm going to share a few stories. I'm going to talk a little bit about some theory, and then talk about our definition of leadership for the common good, and then end up with some specific ways I think we could work at this here. 2008, for me, was a specific year of a lot of learning about leadership. There's a number of things that happened that year. It was the year of the Great Recession. September 17th, 2008, I'll never forget. We underwent a major reorganization in our company, and I served that year as the Chamber of Commerce. And 4 stories really stood out to me from that year. First of all, I served on the Chamber Board for 9 years and spent a lot of time with politicians, from local to national. And as a general rule, I find politicians to be the most insecure people I know. There are exceptions, but as a general rule, and Lauren's shaking his head, he hangs around with them a lot too. I mean, that's just the reality that I experienced. And at that time, we had, our county, in Lancaster, we have 3 county commissioners, always 2 from the dominant party and 1 from the minor party. Usually, the 2 parties fight. Well, we had 2 people in place. I'll call them Pete and Dick. And they were from the same party, and they were fighting all the time. And the real cause of this was Pete. Pete was an egomaniac, and having been in meetings with politicians a lot, you begin to understand that the conversation is always going to turn to how will this help me in my reelection. Well, Pete was obsessed with that. So one day we're having a meeting with the 2 of them, and the meeting's canceled. I forget why. And so Pete's there early, and he calls Dick on his cell phone and says, "Dick, meeting's canceled. You don't have to come." Dick calls me 2 minutes later, and he says, "Jim, is the meeting really canceled?" I said, "Yeah, why are you asking?" He said, "Well, Pete has done this to me before, where he will call me and tell me the meeting's canceled. I won't show up. The meeting happens. He gets all the credit, and everybody wonders where I was." I mean, this is for real. The upshot was the Republican Party, I wasn't going to say the party, the dominant party in Lancaster County, you don't have to think too far, didn't nominate either of them again, and they were both thrown out. And so the ego part of Pete, predominantly, the other person got sucked into it some, but really amounted to a highly dysfunctional group of leaders. Second story. But around the same time, I was aware a good friend of mine was in a local for-profit family business, medium-sized company. And again, it was run by someone with large ego needs. And over the previous 5 years, 1 key family member and 3 senior leaders had left the company due to his leadership style. His leadership style, this friend of mine characterized in these ways: controlling, disempowering. He always used I language as opposed to we. That's a flag for me. when I hear leaders talk about I a lot. So it's we, he would always use I language. Low trust levels. Employees felt that he was always the smartest person in the room. As a result, enormous amount of time and energy were spent by managers strategizing how to position things in the right way to gain his favor, or how to keep him in the dark about things they knew would be a big issue and he'd have to win his way on, or finding ways to cover for employees and the public on things that he did. He was always the elephant in the room, so to speak. Eventually, with the increasing alienation of key family members and managers, the firm had to be sold to a non-family shareholders to keep it afloat, who soon thereafter dismissed him as CEO. Next story. I got, in 2008, one of my favorite parts was spending a week with Margaret Wheatley. Some of you may recognize that name, who does a lot of writing and leadership. And along with 30 other people. And one day I met Margaret in the hallway and had an extended conversation with her, and eventually starting lamenting about a particular issue I was having with this long-term friend of mine. And Margaret called me a drama queen. Now, I had a 7th grader at that point, and I knew what drama was about. I didn't think I was it, but this is what she said to me. Jim, instead of wasting all the time being discouraged about this issue, why not choose to tell a different story? You could deliberately choose another story, one that is positive and grateful. It may not be completely true, but neither is the one you are telling now. Our stories are all told through our own egos and perceptions, and as a result, they are all fictions of our drama queen minds. And the last story. As I mentioned, 2008 was really a tough year for us as a company. From September 17th, from about 5 months later, we dropped 10 to 15% of our sales. We had to do some major reorganizing. And as a result, I went from supervising 11 people to supervising 22 people. And what I learned wasn't something necessarily new, except it was the intensity of the relationships that I had with 22 people that it really started reflecting to me some truth. So I meet every other week. With about half of them, I meet, go over their objectives, their goals, what's going on, support them in whatever way I can, don't hear from them for another 2 weeks. The other half, it's constant. It's like a parasite. There's just constant needs that they have, constant drama happening in their workplace or in their department. And after a while, you start to, like I said, the intensity of this, and you start to understand that where you start to think about why the difference. And about the same time, I was doing some reading, as I often did, and came across a few nuggets that helped give me some perspective. And this first, many of you will remember from Parker Palmer. A leader is a person who has an unusual degree of power to project on other people his or her shadow or his or her light. As a result, a leader must take special responsibility for what's going on inside him or herself, lest the act of leadership create more harm than good. And then Thomas Merton. Our ability to be sincere with ourselves, with God, and with other men is really proportionate to our capacity for sincere love. And the sincerity of our love depends in large measure upon our capacity to believe ourselves loved. Most of the moral and mental and even religious complexities of our time go back to our desperate fear that we are not and can never really be loved by anyone. And then this last one, by a Catholic priest, Father William Barry. Perhaps the world will be saved when a critical mass is reached of people who believe and experienced how much they are loved by God. And when I put these things together, some of these experiences and the reading that I was doing, I had an epiphany of sorts. And there's 3 things that I wrote down that I had discovered. When I work with leaders who have low levels of unconditional love in their lives, despite the presence of a high level of skill, carnage follows their work. On the contrary, when I work with leaders who have the appropriate level of skills and who feel unconditional love in their life, high performance follows. If I put people in leadership positions that operate predominantly from their woundedness, from their ego needs, I'm a hypocrite. For invariably, they will focus more on satisfying their ego needs than achieving the organization's missions and values that I espouse. Therefore, I need to either hire or develop authentic leaders. And authentic leaders I describe as leaders who have high levels of unconditional love in their life, as well as emotional, spiritual, and systems intelligence. Leaders who have a great capacity for love and care and a strong orientation towards servant leadership. And I will posit that only these types of leaders, leaders who are authentic, are truly capable of transforming their world. And I came across some research, and you will recognize some of this, some of you for sure. Daniel Goleman and emotional intelligence. He says that self and social awareness and self-mastery are what make up emotional intelligence. Goleman says the ability to give objective feedback to oneself is in fact the mark of an expert. And he says that self-awareness is the key that begins to unlock high levels of emotional intelligence. ABRAM Maslow, certainly you've all heard of ABRAM Maslow, self-actualization. He says is the clear perception of reality, increased integrity, democratic character structure, ability to love self and others. In contrast to self-actualized people, ABRAM says, average and neurotic people wall off fear, much that lies within themselves. They control, they inhibit, they repress, and they suppress. They disapprove of their deeper selves and expect that others do too. Bandura, self-efficacy. Our belief in our ability to influence and manage life's demands effectively. He says, people with high levels of self-efficacy transform threatening situations into benign ones. They set challenging goals and maintain strong commitments to them. And they have a strong sense of reality, which gives them an ability to change those realities. And finally, attachment theory. Many of us know experiences in early relationships, typically with the parent, create internal working models that affect our relationships. Securely attached people tend to have a positive view of themselves and others, and they also tend to have a positive view of their relationships. So these folks come at it from a developmental and psychological perspective. And recently I've come across some researchers that are coming at this from a more of a sociological perspective and actually from very different disciplines. And this research has helped me to understand how really smart people can be on the opposite sides of issues, even in the face of seemingly incontrovertible evidence. Brendan Nyland from Dartmouth, who's a political scientist. Jonathan HAIDT, some of you may recognize, was at UVA and is now at NYU. He's a social psychologist. He teaches there in the business school, ironically, on ethics. And Dan KAHAN is a law professor at Yale. Separate research, they're working at this, and I've just happened to come across their three of them work and kind of put this together. And here are some of their common conclusions from their work. Did I skip one? Yeah. People care a great deal more about appearance and reputation than about reality. Our moral thinking is much more like a politician searching for votes than a scientist searching for truth. We select the facts and evidence that support our claims. And one of them talks about confirmation bias, which is the tendency to seek out and interpret new evidence in ways that confirm what we already think. Secondly, if we are confronted with facts that go against our already held beliefs, rather than change, we attack the messenger. We have access to search engines in our cell phones where instantly we can find people who support almost any conclusion we want to offer, and oftentimes scientists. And one of them says, this is very interesting, I think, people's actual definition of an expert in their research is a credentialed person who agrees with me. Another common conclusion, we deploy our reasoning skills to support and demonstrate commitment to our team. This one was really fascinating for me. Once we accept a particular narrative and we become blind to once we accept a particular narrative, we become blind to alternative moral worlds. And Jonathan HAIDT says this, if you think that moral reasoning is something we can do to figure out the truth, you'll be constantly frustrated by how foolish, biased, and illogical people become when they disagree with you. But if you think about moral reasoning as a skill we humans evolved to further our social agendas, to justify our own actions, and to defend the teams we belong to, then things will make a lot more sense. And this one, intelligence is not correlated with critical thinking and seeing clearly. Now, based on what John said, I'm not sure. I almost took critical thinking out of here, this slide, after what he said this morning, but I left it there. Intelligence is not correlated with critical thinking and seeing clearly. Really some fascinating stuff on this. They did a lot of research with math majors. Being better at math doesn't just fail to help people converge on the right answer. It actually drives them further apart. The smarter the person is, the dumber the politics can make them. The more information and facts we get, the deeper our disagreements become. Again, they're talking societal now, talking in larger society. This one is fascinating. I selected this one because I used to have this argument with my brother who wanted to do ethics education, and I didn't want to. Ethics education, I think this is HAIDT, says is practically a waste of time, and he teaches ethics at NYU. Nobody is ever going to invent an ethics class that makes people behave ethically after they step out of the classroom. And I think this is the last one. Affirmation and positive self-concept makes people far more resilient and high-performing. Attitudes become more accurate with self-affirmation and remain just as inaccurate without. And that goes back to some of the other folks that I talked about earlier. So what are some of the commonalities in the stories and the research that I just talked about? First of all, our egos dominate much of how we see reality. This is one of my... I like this little cartoon. I removed your ego, and it turns out that's what was clogging your reality. Ego is the part of us that loves the status quo, even when it is not working. It attaches to the past and present and fears the future. We bring our wounds to the workplace, and these wounds tend to dominate our perceptions, hindering our ability to see and understand reality. The human ego prefers anything to failing or changing or dying. Leaders with oversized egos unleash carnage on their organizations and the people they lead. This idea of selection, we engage in the act of selection. And another person I've enjoyed reading is Carl Weick, also a social psychologist. He calls selection the process that generates answers to the questions, what's going on here? For each of us, we select to organize in our minds, what are we seeing? What's going on here? We bracket, he says, and make meaning from our observations, all of which are equivocal. We try to find interpretations and actions into what we have known all along. When something doesn't fit with the past, we discard it. A third commonality, the more ego needs a leader has, the more autocratic his or her leadership tends to be. It's too threatening to invite participation and other people's thoughts and opinions. Intelligence by itself is not correlated with seeing clearly or thinking critically. And the researchers call it different things, but the point is the same. As we develop more self-efficacy, become more self-affirming, become more self-actualized, or feel unconditionally loved, we become more authentic and are able to see more clearly and do a better job of defining reality. And then finally, what I discovered as I worked at this, in my work with our employees, self-awareness is the key that begins to unlock the power of ego. So last academic year, the graduate council appointed a leadership task force. Actually, it was appointed 2 years ago under David's leadership, David Glanzer, that focused on a number of things, including defining what we mean by leadership for the common good. Think of this as kind of our beliefs and our assumptions about leadership, as well as the lens we look through as we develop curriculum. I consider this approach to leadership in large part an anecdote to the problems and issues that we just reviewed about leaders. So leadership for the common good. Now, I suggest that most graduate and professional programs are going to focus on competency skills. That's kind of the hardware of a graduate education. But we're talking about personal formation, competency, and relationships. So this is what we've come up with. Personal formation, developing authentic leaders on a journey of integration, spiritual growth, and maturity. Leaders who understand that personal, organizational, and community existence and success are tied to the sustainability of local and global systems. Competency, developing transformative leaders who design organizations and nurture communities to be resilient and sustainable, with skills in entrepreneurship, shared vision, development, mutual accountability, financial integrity, innovation, empowerment, and systems thinking. And then the final area is relationships, understanding that it is in community we build and maintain trustworthy relationships with each other and God. and that problem solving must be contextual based on constituent and community life conditions. In this context, we transform personal, organizational, and community conflicts into healthy outcomes. In my year here at EMU, I find that we have a natural orientation towards developing these types of leaders. The question for me is, could we be better at this, at realizing our vision of a learning community that offers healing and hope to a diverse world? How could we better contribute to Barry's idea of a critical mass of people who deeply believe and experience how much they're loved by God, and the requirement that that is really what it takes to bring about change in the world? So how might we be more intentional about this? First of all, a common curriculum for both undergrads and grads in this area of leadership. Let me suggest Christopher Newport University as one model. They have 5,000 students, 1,000 of which take a minor in leadership. President Tribble has made the President's Leadership Program a priority and hallmark of his tenure. And he has appointed an Anabaptist, Ben Redekop, as director of this program. The information on the program talks about contributing to something larger than yourself. This program will help you learn to promote positive change and embody the spirit of servant leadership. Through academic study, personal assessment, in-class activities, and assignments, students will gain an understanding of how personal development impacts leadership capabilities, the importance of self-understanding to effective leadership, and the relationship between self and identity. As part of the program, all students must do community service, and they have some courses including things like self, group, and leadership, environmental leadership, cross-cultural leadership, which requires an overseas experience, leading change, women in leadership, etc. Here at EMU and the Grad Council, we have begun discussions on the development of a core curriculum around leadership for the common good, a core group of skills that we think all students should possess no matter their discipline. And we're working on how we might deliver these skills, perhaps allocating 3 hours of credit to a cross-disciplinary group of students or incorporating into an existing curriculum that is already there. For undergrads, Ken Nafzinger shared a vision that he has with me last year, a similar model that would take a holistic approach to student development, a model that would require all students to be part of a curriculum that would focus on mind, body, spirit, and service throughout their 4 years here at EMU. A second area that I think we could work more on is focusing on the development of spiritual disciplines. Play to our uniqueness as a Christian university. I'm certain we're already working at planting seeds of developing spiritual disciplines. For me personally, 2 disciplines have been very helpful, and that's regular meditation and prayer and regular exercise. Jason was talking earlier about the fun and how deep you can go as you're walking or running together, and I really believe in that. So just a few thoughts in conclusion. Socrates believed that philosophers, not technocrats, and I would add certainly not lawyers, that doesn't include Darrell, Lindsay, and Robin, by the way. Socrates believed that philosophers, not technocrats, should be rulers of people. He went on to say that to be a philosopher, one must have a clarity of vision to see things that others cannot see and a real sense of reality. And I'm arguing that as leaders, a big part of our role is to help others develop this clarity of vision. Robert Greenleaf, who John talked about this morning, says this as a test of servant leadership. Do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? Leadership for the common good is a belief that developing authenticity in people is a way to help them transform their world. That the common good is established each time a person, organization, or community reaches beyond individual self-interest for the sake of the greater whole. Increasing people's spiritual health enhances their ability to define reality and mitigate against imposing their ego needs and the resulting carnage on the people and organizations they lead. It understands that we can't be peacemakers if we are not at peace with ourselves. And just finish with something from John chapter 17. Jesus and God are having a conversation. And this is Jesus talking to God. And he says, "As you, Father, are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one as we are one. So that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me, because you loved me before the foundation of the world. Righteous Father, the world does not know you, but I know you, and these know that you have sent me. I made your name known to them, and I will make it known. And I pray that these, whom you have given to me, may experience love in the same way that I have experienced it."